Welcome back. This is episode 187. In this week's episode, I have a special guest, Mitch Anthony. Mitch is a thought leader in the financial planning and retirement planning industry. He's the author of multiple books on various topics. And today we're here to talk about one of his most recent books, The Retirementality. So welcome, Mitch.
Well, yeah, and it's interesting. It's not only one of my more recent, but it's one of my oldest too. So we first wrote this book in 2001, so it's not as new as it was then. And the fifth edition came out a couple of years ago. But yeah, people are still talking about the topic of retirement because it continues to evolve.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's probably in my line of work, right? I started really as an investment advisor and transitioned into focusing on retirement planning. And I think since you wrote the book, I started in the business in 2001. So it really seems like that's what the primary focus of the industry has become, right? On retirement planning, right? Advertisements, products, services.
Yeah, I think the industry at large thought I'd lost my mind when I first wrote the book, because I basically said this is not a one-size-fits-all proposition, and the industry at large is treating it as such.
Sure.
And I would say that there's a bandwidth of people when it comes to the question of retirement. You know, when are you going to retire? Or are you going to retire? Before we talk about when are you going to retire, we should be talking about are you going to retire? Right. But there's an assumption built into the conversation that if you turn 62 or you turn 65, well, then Ryan's going to retire at that age. And I don't buy into that assumption. And I think that we have a bandwidth out there. Maybe on the far left here, we'd have people who should have retired from what they're doing years ago because they no longer are energized by it. They don't like it anymore. They're worn out with it. There's just nothing there for them, and they should have found something else to do with their life. But then when you go over here, on this end of the bandwidth, we've got people who are literally going to die with their boots on. They have no plans on ever retiring. What they do is a part of their identity. They love doing what they do. It's who they are, right?
Sure. Yeah.
And then you have people of all descriptions in between those two descriptions. And so I kind of make the joke that this is an IRA question. It's an individual retirement attitude. What is your personal attitude toward retirement? That's the most important opinion at all. It's not what your neighbor thinks. It's not what your financial advisor thinks. It's not what your wife thinks. It's what you think and what's going to be best for you.
Sure.
So when I first went down this retirement trail in 2000 and started studying, the statistics that you didn't read about in the retirement planning brochure, the typical retirement planning brochure had beaches and golf clubs and
sailboats.
You know what I mean. And we're sitting on the beach drinking our fourth Mai Tai of the day at 3 p.m. And when I started doing the research on what's really going on here, I found a completely different picture. And I found a lot of people. Well, first of all, and I hate to come off as of course, a phone rings.
So you mentioned, Mitch, about the industry treating all retirements as the same. Why do you think that's not the case for most people?
Well, we all, we may have similar careers, but we're not the same people, right? So I know a lot of people in almost any profession you can name who are just counting the days until they retire. But I know other people in those careers who absolutely love that career, and their biggest concern is, they're going to try to push me out the door when I turn 62 or 65.
Yes, yeah.
And that's their biggest concern, right?
Sure.
And because they still want to apply themselves to the things they do, and 65 is not the same for everybody, and we can talk about that a little bit later. But there's
some people are in great health with a lot of energy at 65, right? Other people their health is diminished and they're tired and they're just looking to get out, like you said.
Yeah, when I talk to consumer groups, one of the exercises I take them through is I say, think of somebody who's 65 and acts like they're 80, or excuse me, somebody who's 85 and acts like they're 55.
Sure.
I say, do you know somebody like that? And they all raise their hands and say, yeah, I know somebody like that. And I say, now, I want you to think on this, just keep that person in your mind. And how many of you know somebody who's 45 and acts like they're 90? And everybody says, yeah, I know somebody like that too. And I say, what are we agreeing on here? What we're agreeing on is that age tells us nothing. right? That person who's 45 and acts like they're 90, and that person that's 85 and acts like they're 65. My father is in Las Vegas. He's 88 years old today. I can guarantee you he'll start working here in about an hour. And he'll
Oh,
work
wow.
for 3 hours. He's been in radio for 67 years, and he loves it. And he
Oh,
told me,
good
he
for
said,
him.
if I didn't have this to do, I'd have been dead 20 years ago.
Sure.
So not all people are the same, and we got to stop treating them like they're the same. Ryan, I've traveled the world talking about retirement, and I can tell you this without reservation that the chief retirement cornerstone of retirement policy around our globe, and I'm talking governmental, corporate, organizational, cultural, the chief cornerstone of all retirement policy around our globe is nothing more than ageism. It's the idea that because I'm a certain age, you now have the right to tell me what to do. If I
Yeah.
showed up and said, I've got a life plan for everybody who's 35 years old. Here's where you should live. Here's what your life should look like. Here's what you should be earning. Everybody
Yeah.
would look at me like I was a kook. But I can
Yeah.
do that for a 65-year-old, and that's okay.
Yeah. Well, I guess I don't know if it's in every country, right? I don't know. Here, I mean, it's become accepted, right? I mean, 65 is the magic age for most people. It used to be Social Security and Medicare, now it's just Medicare, so it's baked into our brains, I guess, right? The government
Yes.
got it wired
Yes,
in
it
there
is.
for us. So.
Yes, they did. And look, I used to be a part of that crowd who was trying to find another word for retirement, and I gave up on it because, like as you said, it's baked into our brain,
Yeah.
right? It's part of the nomenclature. But at the same time, that it kind of comes up to one of my definitions of retirement. Retirement is an artificial finish line. It's a finish line that somebody else put out in front of me. I didn't put
Sure.
that finish line out there. Somebody else put it out there. And now they're assuming when I cross that line that I'm going to go ahead and follow suit with everybody else who reached that age. And to me, that's the danger in the conversation for a financial advisor, right? To sit and talk to somebody like they should do what everybody else is doing. Well, maybe they're
Sure.
not everybody else.
Yeah.
Fair enough, right?
True.
And it's also another thing that we need to come to realize if you study the history of retirement, this is nothing more than a social experiment. And I think it's run its course. It was retirement as we know it today, Ryan, was invented in 1885 by Chancellor
Okay.
Otto von Bismarck. Okay. And it was an industrial
Who's
age
that? A
invention.
German king
Yeah.
or?
It
Yeah.
was a German chancellor, and
Okay.
he came up with the idea that if you were 70 or older, you should retire. It should be mandated that you retire. He's trying to get rid of old people in the government. Well,
Okay.
a couple numbers that might interest your listeners. Number one, von Bismarck himself was 76 years old at the time of the legislation. Apparently, he
Okay.
was grandfathered in. And
Okay.
another number that might interest your listeners is that the average German worker in 1885 lived to the ripe old age of 46. So he literally
Yeah.
legislated that you retire 30 years before or after your life expectancy.
Sure. Yeah.
24 years after your life
Yeah.
expectancy. So if we had that same algorithm here in the United States, our retirement age would be 109.
Okay.
Doesn't make sense.
Yeah.
And what you also have to realize about the industrial age is what people were trading for a paycheck. They were trading raw physical strength, right?
Sure.
It was physical output.
Yeah.
And it just made sense to the industrialists that if you were 60 years old, you didn't have the physical strength, the motivation, the wherewithal, the vitality to perform that physical job. And so we could take you out of our machinery and replace you with a 20-year-old, and the machine would resume its efficiencies.
Sure.
But today, what are people trading for a paycheck? They're trading intellectual capital.
Yeah.
They're trading relational capital. They're trading experiential capital. And when does that start to diminish?
Depends, right?
Right? Well,
It could be a while.
it totally depends.
Could be like your
Well,
dad
like you're in a business,
in your 90s.
right?
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm assuming you're in your 30s or something like that.
I appreciate
And,
that. I just turned
there may come an
45 a
age
couple
where-
weeks ago, Mitch.
Well, you're looking good, man. But the day's going to come along where they're going to start saying to you, it's probably when you turn 60, they're going to say, "Well, Ryan, when are you going to retire?" And you're going to go,
Yeah.
"Well, wait a minute. This business has never been easier."
Sure.
and I'm making more money than I've ever made in my life. Why would I go now?
Sure. Yeah, that's the challenging part, right? I mean, there's a lot. I mean, in our business, right? My business, there's a lot of financial advisors that work until their 70s, 80s because like you said, we're trading intellectual capital and relationships. It's not like we're digging, ditches or building things that requires a lot of our physical, endurance.
Yeah. So that's reality of the day we live in, meeting policy that was framed by something completely different.
Sure.
Right? So that's why I've been saying for the last 20 years, this no longer fits. And we've got to come up with another way of talking about this. And here's another thing. Here's a conversation that's missing. What did you like about your work and what did you not like about your work? Right? Because
Sure.
for a lot of people, what it really comes down to is, I just want to get rid of doing this stuff I hate doing
Yeah.
and focus less time and less effort doing the stuff I love doing.
Sure.
And that's how a lot of people end up going from 65 to 75 and just cherry picking the aspects of work that they love because it makes them feel alive. It makes them feel like they matter. And I'll tell you, Ryan, there's one topic that we've completely underestimated. And I know this for a fact. I've done too much research on it. It's boredom. Imagine waking up every day with nothing to do.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah.
Right. And I've talked to thousands of people about this, and they're like, what am I supposed to do now? And that's why 60% of people out there are going to go back to work part-time within a year of retiring.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I've had some other guests on, we've talked about like finding your purpose in retirement. And I think that is exactly dovetails into that, right? If your whole purpose is, right, maybe it's getting a job and you have a family, it's raising your family, they grow up, they leave. Now it's your job. And then you leave that. Like, what is your purpose, right? I mean, what's driving you to keep pushing yourself?
Yeah. I remember, I was on a flight to the West Coast, and be careful if I ever run into any of your listeners here. If you have gray hair and you're flying anywhere, I'm probably going to start a conversation with you.
They'll put their headphones in, don't worry.
Yeah. And I asked him, I said, well, are you retired? He said, well, his answer really intrigued me. He said, well, I tried that. I flunked. And I said, what do you mean? And he said, well, within about 6 weeks of retiring, I was wandering around my basement and garage looking for something to break so I'd have something to fix. And I said, well, Tell me more. And he started telling me how he was a manufacturer's rep, and he'd done really well. And they kind of pushed him and said, it's time to retire, and we're going to hire a younger guy and blah, blah, blah. And he said, let me tell you about my first day back at the job. He said, first of all, within about 3 months, they called me and said, your old territory is a shambles. And we want to make a proposition here that you cherry pick whatever customers you want, work any hours you want, but we'd love to have you engaged with your old clients.
Yeah.
And he said every cell in my being was screaming hallelujah, but he said, I don't know, I'll have to think about it. I'm kind of enjoying my life in retirement. He was lying through his teeth, of course.
Yeah.
And so he got back to his first meemeeting with a client. He said everybody jumped up out of their chair and out of their office and, hey, Lars, how you doing? Great to see you. Let's go get a beer when you're done. And then the owner of the company waved him down to his corner office and said, hey, good to see you. He said, could I pick your brain here for a second? And he closed the door. And he sat Lars down and he said, I got this situation. I'm not sure what to do with this. And Lars said suddenly it hit him what he'd walked away from when he retired. He said, number one, he really enjoyed the people he worked with. They were his friends.
Sure.
And so he literally had retired into a vacuum of friendship. And then he said the second thing was he loved fixing problems, and that's where he got those opportunities to fix problems. This is why he's wandering around his basement breaking things.
Sure.
And I'll never forget that story because so many people I meet walk into retirement just like that. They never ponder. As a matter of fact, Ryan, I saw a study that people spend more time planning a 2-week vacation than they do a 30-year retirement.
I could see
because
that,
they just assume it's going to take care of itself.
Sure. Yeah,
so we need more thought.
For sure, yeah. I mean, that's for a lot of things in people's financial lives, right? That book, The Millionaire Next Door, talked about how little people plan their finances, but they plan their vacations a lot more.
Yeah, and this could be potentially 30 years of your life. And what I tell people is, look, let's forget about the pressure of having to figure it out. This is not a one and done proposition where you're jumping off a retirement cliff and you got to figure out on the way down how you're going to land. This is a segment of life. It's an experiment. It's a life experiment where you're going to try two, three, four different things until you finally kind of settle on, okay, I think I've got this put together the way I want it now. But
Sure.
not many people figure it out on their very first attempt. So I like to me, that's a way of giving people permission to think about it. Let them know. And this came out of a RAND study on the unretirement trend. They found that it took people 3 to 4 attempts at retirement to finally get it to where they wanted.
You mean they retired and then went to work at another job, or?
No, they retired into the scenario they thought was going to work.
Okay. Like, I'm going to play
Okay,
golf,
and
4 days a week or something.
yeah, and nobody explained to them that they're not going to get better at golf after 65, right?
Yeah.
And then the other thing, here's another thing. I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but the divorce rate spikes in the first 18 months of retirement.
Sure.
Because she said, I married you for better or for worse, but not for lunch, and get out of here, you drive me crazy. And there's a lot of tension because what retirement does is it threatens that natural spacing that kept that relationship
Sure.
well,
Yeah.
right?
I could see that. Yeah.
So there's just a lot of stuff that people don't talk about and they experience, and then they got to go, okay, well, maybe I should take a part-time job as a golf ranger or something, or
Yeah.
maybe I should, whatever it is, or maybe I'll start a little hobby, or maybe I'll volunteer for this organization that I like. But they got to play around with it and figure it out.
Yeah, for sure. Right. You need something to do. And also social interaction. If you're working and a lot of your friends and coworkers or people you enjoy being with, and all of a sudden they're gone, that's got to be really difficult.
Well, that's you hit on a hot point there, Ryan. That's one of the things they found that is a predictor of struggling in retirement is those people that don't have a social network outside of work. And I remember my mother-in-law, bless her heart, she sat down with my father-in-law after 42 years of teaching and made him sign a pre-retirement agreement. This is like prenup meets retiree.
Okay.
And it was a laundry list of things he could do and not do because she didn't want him following him around because she knew he didn't have any hobbies. He had no
Yeah.
social network outside of the school.
Sure.
And he literally was this guy wandering around following her. And it was driving her crazy.
Some women would like
And
that.
I remember reading.
That's according to my
I
wife.
remember
That's
David
what she'd
Brooks.
like.
Yeah. Well, and by the way, I created this profile to solve for that. It's called My Retirementality. It's like personality profile meets retirement.
Okay.
So that a couple can fill this out and realize, okay, I'm wired this way, you're wired this way. This is probably the way this is going to play out. Instead of walking into that retirement space assuming we're going to be exactly the same. We're
Sure.
not.
Yeah.
And so that's a good way to, get rid of that tension right up front. And we are who we are. Here's a question I pose for people, Ryan. I say to people, okay, what changes in the 24 hours from year 64, day 365, and year 65, day 1? That's 24 hours. What
Sure.
changes about you in those 24 hours? And of course, the answer is absolutely nothing.
Yeah.
I'm the same person I was
Sure.
24 hours ago. But the world at large assumes that everything's changed now. Open the curtains and it's a brand new set.
Yeah.
It isn't. So you got to be ready for the fact you're still going to be you. And
Yeah.
it doesn't magically change when you have your 65th birthday.
Sure. So you mentioned the retirement mentality questionnaire. Is that what you called it?
Yeah, it's in the book. So the book
Okay.
is My Retirement, or excuse me, the book is The Retirementality. I should have had one here with me. I could show you. But
We'll put a
yeah,
link. We'll put a
and
link
get
in
the
the show
fifth
notes.
edition.
Yeah.
Okay, and yeah, there's a number of profiles that couples or individuals can go through in the book to help them think through these different questions, like what's your vision going forward? The first conversation we start is what have you observed watching other people retire? It's called the retirement observations conversation.
Sure.
And it's what good examples have you seen with people that retired, and what examples have been sort of object lessons to you, like holy cow, I didn't see that
Yeah.
coming. Right? We've all, especially you as an advisor, you've got stories, right?
Sure.
You've seen
Yeah.
people retire, and for some it worked out really well, and others it didn't work out quite as
Yeah.
they planned.
Okay. And then, so you suggest most, people approaching retirement, they go through a process like this to try to decide if retirement's right for them, or just to make it the best retirement it can be.
Yeah, I mean, I spend a lot of my time coaching advisors on how to have this conversation, retirement coaching conversation. And we've got a lot of resources at ROL Advisor. ROL stands for Return on Life Advisors.
Sure.
And we have resources where advisors can walk their clients through this conversation and tools they can use and customize it to their clientele, because there's a real void in our society here. You have coaches for just about everything. And up until a couple, 3 years ago, we really didn't have retirement coaches. And I started doing this about 6 years ago, and just coaching advisors on the process and the conversation, the dialogue that's most useful for their clients going forward. And it's not a one and done conversation.
Sure.
Right? There's maybe a conversation we have 5 years ahead going, what are your thoughts about retirement right now? You're not there, but what are your thoughts about it? That's where we have that retirement observation conversation. And then we have the on the cusp of retirement conversation. Maybe it's 6 months away.
Sure.
How prepared are you for that? What are you going to retire to, as opposed to what are you going to retire from? And then there's that, what I call the retirement honeymoon conversation. You've been in it 6 months. How's it going? Right? What's matching your expectations? What's not matching your expectations? And then we have what I call the reality check conversation about a year down the road. Like, okay, what have you learned? Right?
Sure.
What have you learned? And where is reality meeting your financial structure, for example? And one of the problems, Ryan, is that in retirement at large and in the industry that we're in, we've only had that financial conversation. Do you have enough money to retire? Okay, you got enough money, everything else. Everything else is going to take care of itself. Well, it doesn't take care of itself. Yeah. And for example, you might have all the money you need, but are lacking purpose. And there isn't enough money in the world to give you purpose. Retirement or money will fund a purpose, but it won't find one.
Yeah.
And so to me, there's two big questions you can put to your client. This is a good way to start this conversation. Say, Mr. and Mrs. Client, we really need to answer two questions. One, how do you spend your time right now?
Yeah.
Right? And two, or when you retire, how do you want to spend your time? And two, do you have enough money to pay for it? Well, we can't answer, do you have enough money to pay for it, until we know what you're doing. Sure. And most people can't even answer that question.
Yeah.
And if they say to you, well, I'm going to golf every day, well, I'm assuming the next question out of your mouth is public or private.
Yeah,
because the price tags vary accordingly.
Yeah.
Right? And everyone I've ever met has the same amount to spend in retirement, 168 hours a week. How much thought have you given to that? We've got a little exercise in the book called My Ideal Week in Retirement, where they have 21 slots of time. All right? Morning, afternoon, evening, Monday through Sunday. Sure. How are you going to spend those 21 slots? People say, I'm going to golf every day, and they'll put in their tee times, and now they got 70% white space staring at them, and they haven't given any thought to that. Well, I can tell you where they're going to end up. They're going to end up at the 19th hole. So it's a conversation people need to have with themselves more than anything.
Yeah. No, I like that. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I mean, that's predominantly what we as advisors are focusing on, right? The do you have enough, and how can you make that work? But this whole other side is extremely important too, maybe even more important.
Well, yeah, and what are you in business for? You're in business to help people make it not just a safe landing, but to live a rich life. After we spend all this time gathering money and investing money, for what? Well, to me, it's to have a better return on life. And sure. I define that as have the best life possible with the money you have.
Yeah, I like that.
That's return on life.
Yeah. Awesome. Yeah, before we wrap up, is there anything else you want to leave with the listeners?
Well, I think, nobody else can tell you what to do with your life. Nobody can tell your client what to do with their life. But what we lack in this world is this conversation. And there are a lot of people, a lot of your clientele who are worried about this, and they just haven't expressed it. And it's incumbent on you, the advisor, to open that door of conversation with your clients. and even after they retired, maybe 6 months or a year after they retired. So tell me, what's retirement really like? And you're going to have some
Sure.
really, really interesting conversations.
Yeah, I like that. Awesome. Well, thanks, Mitch. Thanks for coming on. Really appreciate all your input, and hope to have you back on in the future. And we'll put a link to the book we talked about, and also some of your other books as well. With this episode. And if people want to reach out to you, can they do that through your website or?
Yeah, what they can for email, mitch@mitchanthony.com, and for resources, roladvisor.com.
Okay, great. All right.
All right.
Thanks so
Thanks,
much.
Ryan. Enjoyed the
Okay.
conversation.
Okay. Thank
Bye.
you. Bye.